A silent intruder slips past midnight. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Comment where you're listening from. Your presence strengthens this community. Now into the case. The fog lay thick upon London that night, a yellow, clinging vapour that muffled the rattle of wheels and turned the gas lamps along the Bayswater Road into dim, floating halos. In that smothered gloom, the great houses of Queen's Gate loomed like hulking shadows, their windows mostly dark, their inhabitants long since retired from the world's activity. It was a few minutes past midnight when the stillness at number 47 was broken. In the bedroom on the second floor, Sir Reginald Avery lay awake upon his back, the bedclothes drawn neatly to his chest. He was a man in the late autumn of life, with a face that had once been handsome, but was now scored by the sharp lines of care and a too-ready temper. Sleep had eluded him. His mind was busy with ledgers, debts, and that unpleasant letter from his solicitor that he had thrust into the back of his study desk. A clock on the mantel began to chime the hour with a dull, metallic note. As the 12th stroke faded, he heard it, a sound so slight it might have been a trick of the imagination, a faint metallic click, followed by the almost inaudible sigh of a door being opened and closed somewhere below. He raised his head, listening. The house was one of those tall, narrow structures common in that part of the city, with a basement for the servants, the family rooms on the ground floor, and the bedrooms above. At such an hour, the only movement should have been the slow padding of the night footman making his rounds, or the occasional creak borne from old timbers contracting in the damp. This was something different. There it was, again, the muffled tread of a footstep, not heavy, but very deliberate, moving along the corridor leading to his study. Sir Reginald sat up fully now, his breath quickening. His first impulse was to tug the bell rope at his bedside and summon the butler. But some stubborn remnant of pride, or perhaps simple curiosity, held his hand. With a muttered exclamation, he slid from the bed, thrust his feet into his slippers, and reached for the heavy robe that hung from the bedpost. As he tied the cord about his waist, another sound reached him, the soft squeal of a hinge, and then the faintest scrape, such as might be made by metal upon wood. It came unmistakably from his study on the ground floor. "The safe," he muttered. "By heaven, the fellow has found the safe." Snatching up a candlestick, he lit it with trembling fingers and opened his bedroom door. The corridor beyond was a dim, tunnel-like space, patterned faintly with the glow from his candle, and the distant wash of a gas lamp through the stairwell window. He hesitated only a moment, listening, then stepped out, the floorboards giving a protesting creak beneath his weight. On the landing below, a different figure had also been roused. Clara Avery, Sir Reginald's niece, had been sleeping lightly in a smaller room adjoining the back of the house. She was a pale, slight young woman of perhaps 23, with clear grey eyes and a manner at once determined and reserved. The murmur of movement had reached her through the thin walls, and, thinking first of her uncle's health, he had suffered a minor seizure only the previous month. She had thrown on a shawl and stepped into the hall just as Sir Reginald's candle appeared above. "Uncle?" she called softly. "Is anything the matter?" "Go back to your room, Clara," he snapped, though his voice was hoarse. "There's someone in the house. I heard him at the study door. Jenkins must be asleep at his post, the fool." "A burglar?" Her hand flew to her throat. "Shall I wake the servants?" "You will do no such thing. We shall see what we are dealing with first. There is likely some simple explanation. A board left loose, a window unlatched. Stay back, child." He moved past her, shielding the candle from the draught as they descended together. The stairs seemed to lengthen before them, the shadows stretching and twisting. With every cautious step, somewhere in the depths of the house. A door closed with a soft but unmistakable click. They reached the ground floor and crossed the hall, Sir Reginald leading, his slippered feet whispering against the carpet runner. The door to the study stood slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness where it should have been shut. Sir Reginald halted. For an instant, neither of them moved. Then, from inside the room, there came a sound that was horribly out of place in that respectable house, a quick, strangled cry followed by the crash of something falling. Sir Reginald lunged forward, sending the door flying back against the wall. The study was a long, book-lined chamber at the front of the house, lit only by the dying embers in the grate. The air smelt faintly of tobacco and sealing wax. In the wavering light of the candle, the scene that met their eyes seemed at once confused and yet unnervingly still. Near the French windows that opened onto the front balcony, the housemaid Ellen lay crumpled on the rug, one arm flung out, her dark hair loose about her face. A small table stood overturned beside her, its contents, a glass paperweight, an ink bottle, several pens, scattered across the floor. Ink had formed a black pool upon the carpet, glistening in the candlelight. But of any intruder there was no sign. Clara gave a little cry and rushed to the maid's side. "She's bleeding!" she exclaimed. "Oh, uncle, her head!" Sir Reginald, breathing heavily, set the candle down upon the desk and strode to the windows. The curtains were not fully drawn, but stood half-parted, allowing a thin shaft of streetlight to slip between them. He tested the handle. "Locked," he muttered. "Still locked from within. Whoever was here did not escape this way." Clara, meanwhile, had turned Ellen gently onto her back. A faint bruise was forming upon the girl's temple, and there was a small smear of blood by the hairline. But her breathing, though shallow, was regular. "She's alive?" Clara said. "It seems she struck her head when she fell." "Or was struck," Sir Reginald replied grimly. "Hold the light." He took the candlestick once more and raised it high, letting its glow sweep across the room. Nothing seemed disturbed beyond the fallen table. The leather-bound volumes along the shelves stood in their usual rank. The armchairs by the fire were empty and undisturbed, and the great mahogany desk near the opposite wall showed no obvious sign of interference. The door to the corridor was the one by which they had entered. There was no other exit. Yet there was one object that drew his eye at once, the iron-fronted safe built into the wall behind the desk, usually hidden by a framed landscape. The picture now rested upon the floor, leaning crookedly against the wainscoting. The safe door stood wide open. Sir Reginald uttered an oath and thrust the candle into Clara's hand as he dropped to his knees before the open compartment. Bundles of papers lay neatly stacked within, tied with red tape. Here and there the dull gleam of metal betrayed the presence of various trinkets, old family jewellery, and a handful of sovereigns kept there against emergencies. He pulled out one packet after another, riffling through them with shaking fingers. "Is it gone?" Clara whispered. "Has he taken something?" Sir Reginald did not answer at once. His hand had stopped upon a single blue envelope lying in the middle of the lowest shelf, alone and slightly askew amongst the orderly ranks. It bore no writing upon the outside, but there was a faint, dusty smudge upon one corner, as if someone with less than clean hands had recently placed it there. He stared at it, his jaw tightening. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I cannot tell at a glance. The bonds are here, the title deeds. The cash appears intact. Curse the man. What was he after?" Clara had raised her head, her eyes following his gaze. "That envelope," she said hesitantly. "I do not recall seeing it before." "Nor do I," he replied. There was a pause in which only the weak crackle of the fire could be heard. Then the maid gave a faint moan and stirred. Clara bent over her. "Ellen, can you hear me? It is Miss Avery. You are safe now." The girl's eyelids fluttered. She looked up at them with dazed incomprehension, then winced and raised a hand to her head. "The gentleman?" she whispered thickly. He was here, sir. I saw him at the safe." Sir Reginald leaned forward. "What gentleman? Speak up, girl." "I was coming to put out the fire," she said, her words slurring, "like I do of an evening." The door was open, and there he was, bent over the wall, safe, with a lamp. I thought, "Wait, what are you doing, Jenkins?" But when he turned, her brow puckered. "It weren't Jenkins, sir, a stranger. He had a mask over his face and gloves. I screamed, and he pushed me. That's all I remember." "Did you see how he got in?" Clara asked gently. "Through the window? The door?" Ellen shook her head weakly. "No, miss. I only saw him there by the safe. He moved so quiet, like a cat, he did." Sir Reginald rose to his feet, his expression dark. "A masked stranger in my study, opening my safe with the ease of a man using his own latchkey, and vanishing from a locked room without leaving so much as his name," he said. "This is intolerable. I shall have Jenkins roused at once, and the police sent for. They must trace the scoundrel, if only to discover what the deuce he wanted." As he spoke, he turned toward the door, and halted, his gaze fixing upon the floor just inside the threshold. Clara followed his eyes and saw, half obscured by the edge of the rug, the faint outline of a footprint. It was a single impression, where some dirt or damp had caught the sole and left a darker smudge upon the pale boards beyond the carpet's edge. It was oddly narrow, with a pronounced rise at the instep, and the heel showed a peculiar arrangement of small, circular marks as though made by more than one row of hobnails. Sir Reginald scowled, but it was with the impatience of a man who sees only a piece of dirt spoiling his clean floor. Clara, however, felt a strange chill pass through her. There was something terribly alone about that solitary print, like the isolated note of some sinister chord. She said nothing. Within half an hour the household was in an uproar. Jenkins, the elderly butler, stammered protestations of innocence and professional outrage at the very idea of someone moving about the house without his knowledge. The night footman insisted that no one had entered by the front door since 11 o'clock. The lower windows were examined, the locks inspected, the area outside the house searched by the constable summoned from the nearest point on his beat. No ladder marks were visible on the wet earth of the basement area, no scuffs upon the brick where one might have climbed. The front balcony, reached only by the French windows of the study, overlooked a sheer drop to the pavement below. The door to the study itself, like the windows, bore no sign of forcible entry. Only the fallen picture, the open safe, the unconscious maid, and that one lonely footprint spoke to the presence of any intruder at all. By 2 o'clock an inspector from the local station had arrived and taken his notes. Sir Reginald, red in the face and dangerously near apoplexy, demanded instant action and threatened, in colourful terms, to bring the matter before his friends at the Home Office if proper attention were not paid. The inspector did what he could. He ordered the footprint covered with a glass, shade from the drawing-room and the room otherwise left untouched until the arrival of men more practised in such curious mysteries. "For I'll say this, sir," he remarked in the hall as he took his leave. "It's a rum case, a very rum case indeed. Nothing taken that we can see, no sign of how he got in, and none of how he got out. If there's a man in London who'd care to have a look at it, it's Mr. Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street." At this, Clara, who had been hovering on the edge of the conversation, felt a flicker of hope stir beneath her anxiety. Sherlock Holmes?" she repeated. "I believe I have read that name in the papers." "A consulting detective, miss," said the inspector. "Not a regular policeman, but very useful to us at times. Knows his way around a footprint, so they say. I shall send for him by the morning if you've no objection, Sir Reginald. We could do with a clever head on this." Sir Reginald snorted. "If he can explain how a man walks through locked doors and leaves my property in a worse state than before, you may fetch him and welcome," he growled. "Though I dare say this will prove some crude attempt at robbery by a common housebreaker puffed up into a marvel by your imagination." "Perhaps, sir," the inspector replied mildly. "All the same, I'll put the matter before Mr. Holmes. It's not every night we get a gentleman burglar who leaves coin and jewels untouched and puts his mind to other business." "Other business?" Clara repeated quietly. "You think he came for something in particular?" The inspector shrugged. "That safe wasn't open for the view, miss. You'll want to examine your papers very careful in the cold light of day. For now, I'd say all of you had best get what rest you can. I'll see that a man is posted outside till morning." He touched his hat and was gone, swallowed up by the swirling fog beyond the front door. Clara stood for a long moment in the silent hall, listening to the fading ring of his footsteps upon the pavement. Somewhere above, Ellen lay under the watchful care of the cook, still murmuring confusedly of the masked gentleman and the sudden blow. Sir Reginald, having relocked the safe and grudgingly replaced the mysterious blue envelope in its place among the other documents, had retired once more to his room, muttering darkly about scoundrels, negligence, and the untrustworthiness of servants. Yet the house did not feel as it had before. The walls seemed to hold their breath. The shadows did not fall quite where they used to. It was as though some invisible presence had brushed against the life of number 47 Queen's Gate and, for reasons known only to itself, chosen to touch the heart of its secrets. Clara drew her shawl tighter about her shoulders and mounted the stairs slowly, her mind turning to the name the inspector had spoken, Sherlock Holmes. If this man of Baker Street could truly read meaning from a footprint, from a fallen picture, from a blue envelope that had no business being where it was, then he would find a welcome ally in at least one member of the troubled household. And so, while the fog thickened over London and the long night dragged on, the stage was quietly set for that meeting between the perplexities of Queen's Gate and the singular mind of the most remarkable man it has ever been my privilege to know. For, as it chanced, by the time Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard presented himself at our familiar rooms in Baker Street later that same morning, with the details of what he termed the Midnight Intruder, both Holmes and I were more than ready for a case that promised, from the very outset, to be anything but commonplace. It was about 9:30 by my watch when Lestrade was shown up to our sitting-room. The morning was of that peculiarly cheerless London sort, when the sky seems a low, unbroken slab of grey stone, and the air carries a raw damp that creeps into the bones. Holmes had been languidly stretched upon the sofa, his long, nervous fingers playing with the tassel of his dressing gown, while I scanned the previous evening's paper over my breakfast. The moment our visitor's foot sounded upon the stair, however, I saw the familiar sharpening of my friend's features. His eyes brightened, his whole figure seemed to gather itself as a hound does at the cry of the horn, and by the time Lestrade entered, he was already half risen, his attention fixed. "You come early, Lestrade," he remarked. "The Yard is awake betimes when a case promises to be interesting. Pray take a chair. Watson, the armchair by the fire will serve." Lestrade, thin, bird-like, and precise as ever in his movements, set his hat upon the table and drew out a notebook. "You've heard nothing of it yet, Mr. Holmes," he began. "It's too fresh for the press, though I'll warrant some enterprising reporter has his nose in Queen's Gate already. We've a queer business there. A midnight intrusion into the house of Sir Reginald Avery, Baronet. The facts, as we know them, are these. He spoke concisely, giving much the same account as I have already set down: the hour, the disturbed house, the maid struck insensible, the safe found open yet apparently untouched, the mysterious blue envelope, and, most intriguing of all, the solitary footprint half on carpet and half on polished board. Holmes listened with his eyelids drooping and his fingers pressed together before him, his pose one of profound indolence. But I, who knew his habits, could see the slight play of his jaw and the almost imperceptible tightening of the skin about his eyes. "You say the safe had been opened, yet nothing is missing?" he asked, when Lestrade had finished. "So far as Sir Reginald can ascertain," Lestrade replied. "There was cash, jewellery, some bonds, and a number of private papers. He has gone through them as best he can. The money is counted, the valuables seem in order. The only thing out of the common is that blue envelope, which neither he nor his household can account for." "And that remains in the safe?" "For the moment. I had it left exactly as it was until you should see it." "Excellent." Holmes clasped his hands. "You do not perhaps appreciate the merit of your own restraint, Lestrade, but I do. Now as to this masked intruder. The maid describes him as a gentleman, by which I take it she means that he was of better cut than the average cracksman?" Lestrade shrugged. "She says he moved quietly and had an air about him. That is as near as she can get." The mask covered the upper part of his face. The room was dim, and she was more concerned with the blow she received than with studying his wardrobe. "And no sign of entrance or exit?" "None. The windows were locked from within. There is a balcony, but no marks of climbing. The front door was under the eye of the night footman. The back premises are secure enough, yet the man was there, and he was gone." Lestrade's mouth tightened. "If we didn't have that footprint, I'd say Sir Reginald's imagination was playing him tricks. But the girl was knocked out, the safe was opened, and there's the print for all to see." Holmes sprang lightly to his feet and paced to the window, where he stood for a moment looking out upon the lifeless street. "A locked room, an untouched hoard, and a stranger who leaves his mark and nothing more," he mused. "What do you make of it yourself, Lestrade?" "A bungled burglary," the inspector replied promptly. "He may have been interrupted by the maid, frightened when she cried out, and bolted the way he came before he had time to take anything. As to how he got in, I've no doubt there's some window or stair we've overlooked." "And the blue envelope?" Holmes asked, turning sharply. Lestrade hesitated. Some paper he had meant to take away, perhaps, and changed his mind about. Or something he dropped. Holmes smiled faintly. "So the thief brings with him what he intends to steal and leaves it behind? A novel theory, Lestrade, and not altogether consistent with your bungled burglary. No, there is design here. We must go to Queen's Gate at once." "You will come, then?" The inspector's relief was evident. "Assuredly. Watson, your hat and coat. There is nothing so stimulating as a problem with one footprint and two locked exits. It is like a chess problem where the solution depends upon one apparently insignificant move. I confess, I am curious to see that print." As we descended the stairs together, I ventured a remark. "You think the footprint will tell you more than it has told Lestrade?" "My dear Watson," said Holmes, with that touch of good-humoured superiority I knew so well, "a footprint is like a signature. It is rarely intelligible to one man and wholly characteristic to another. Come, let us see what our midnight visitor has been good enough to write upon Sir Reginald Avery's floor." A fine drizzling rain had begun to fall by the time our cab set us down opposite number 47 Queen's Gate. The house presented as solid and respectable a front as any in that dignified line. Tall windows, a clean stone facade, and a neat flight of steps leading to the glossy black door, on which the brass knocker shone despite the gloom. Yet, even before we crossed the street, I saw Holmes's gaze travel not to the door, but upward, to the narrow balcony outside the first-floor windows. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, pausing for a heartbeat. A 6-foot drop to the pavement from those French windows. No convenient drainpipe within arm's length. The brickwork is smooth, not an easy ascent, even for the most enterprising of our London acrobats. "You think he did not come that way, then?" I asked. "I think," he replied, already mounting the steps, "that our intruder prefers doors to precipices." The bell was answered by a solemn man with grizzled hair and a face like old parchment, whom I rightly supposed to be Jenkins, the butler. Behind him the hall stretched away in a properly ordered vista of framed prints, hat stand, and umbrella rack. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson," Lestrade announced briskly. "Sir Reginald is expecting us." We were shown into a morning room at the back, where a coal fire burned low in the grate. Sir Reginald Avery stood upon the hearthrug, a tumbler of some dark liquid in his hand. His face, which I had described from Lestrade's account the previous evening, looked more haggard in the daylight, the lines about his mouth drawn, and his eyes inflamed from lack of sleep. Beside him, in a simple dark dress with a narrow band of white at the throat, stood Miss Clara Avery. She turned toward us with a composed gravity that in one so young I found quietly impressive. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Reginald began with an attempt at stiffness that did not quite conceal his underlying agitation, "I have been told that you are useful in these confounded affairs. If you can make sense of what occurred in this house last night, you are welcome to whatever credit is to be had from it." Holmes bowed slightly. "My only aim is to arrive at the truth, Sir Reginald. If you will be so good as to let me see the scene exactly as it stood when the police arrived, we shall not trouble you long at present. Afterwards, I shall be grateful for a few particulars." Miss Avery spoke for the first time. "The inspector insisted that nothing be touched, Mr. Holmes. The room is just as we left it, save for poor Ellen, of course. She's sleeping upstairs." "A wise precaution," Holmes said approvingly. "If you would be so kind as to conduct us there." We passed into the hall and along a short corridor to a door at the front of the house. Lestrade produced a key, turned it in the lock, and stood aside. Holmes entered first with that peculiar, quick, noiseless step of his, and paused just inside the threshold. For a moment he did not move. His eyes travelled slowly round the room, taking in the scattered objects near the fallen table, the faint smear of ink upon the carpet, the open grate, the high shelves of books, and finally the safe in the wall behind the desk, now closed and again concealed by the landscape that had been rehung somewhat askew. Then and only then did his glance drop to the floor immediately in front of him, where, beneath the glass shade appropriated from the drawing-room, lay the footprint. It was exactly as Lestrade had described it, a narrow, almost delicate impression, blurred at the edges where the damp had begun to dry, but with the heel sharply defined. Within that heel I could plainly see the tiny circular pits left by 3 rows of small hobnails, their pattern unlike any I had seen on a common labourer's boot. Holmes knelt, his face very close to the glass. "Excellent," he murmured. "No one has stepped here since, I think." "I've kept everyone clear of that part of the floor," said Lestrade. "It's the only mark we found." "There would be no other," Holmes replied absently. "The carpet has served as a conspirator. You observed, Watson, that the impression only begins where the rug ends. Our visitor was either fortunate or careful in his choice of path." He rose and moved to the desk. His fingers hovered an inch above its surface, tracing the air above certain objects, but touching nothing. Then he turned to the picture. "You have replaced this since last night, Sir Reginald?" "Yes," the baronet said shortly. At the inspector's request, it had been thrown down. "And the safe?" Holmes asked. Sir Reginald hesitated, then stepped forward and swung aside the picture. The iron door shone dully in the dim light. He took out a key, unlocked it, and drew it open. "The contents are as they were. The bonds, the deeds, the money, all is present." Holmes bent, his gaze travelling over the neat parcels and packets. His hand shot out suddenly and stopped, hovering over a single blue envelope which lay a shade forward from the rest. "This is the stranger in the company, I think," he said quietly. "You told Lestrade you did not recognize it?" "I did not," said Sir Reginald. "Nor do I now. It bears no address, no seal. I have not opened it." "But you have considered doing so," Holmes observed. "The flap is fractionally raised at the right-hand corner and shows the mark of a thumb. Not your own, I fancy." "You are left-handed." Sir Reginald started. "How the devil—" "Merely an observation," Holmes said pleasantly. "May I see it?" The baronet hesitated once more, then took up the envelope and passed it to him. Holmes held it delicately, weighing it in his hand, then raised it to his face for an instant. "No perfume. A faint trace of machine oil. Interesting. The paper is of good quality, though not expensive. And there is something within, folded more than once. You have truly no idea, Sir Reginald, what document in your possession might prompt a midnight visit from a masked gentleman?" "None," Sir Reginald answered, though his eyes flickered for an instant toward Miss Avery. It was scarcely perceptible, but Holmes's gaze, which missed little, followed the movement. "Then let us not tear aside the veil prematurely," he said, slipping the envelope carefully back into the safe. "For the moment, it is more valuable to us unopened than read. We must first learn who placed it there and how he came into this room without troubling your locks. After that, we may permit ourselves the indulgence of curiosity." Holmes closed the safe with a soft click and let the picture swing back into place. For a few moments he stood quite still in the middle of the room, his head slightly bent, his eyes half closed. I knew he was reconstructing in his mind, step by step, the movements of that unknown visitor. "Let us take the intruder's path," he said at last. "We know where it ended, at the door, with that obliging footprint. We must see where it began." He crossed to the French windows and drew the curtain fully aside. The faint daylight struggled through the glass, showing the iron rail of the balcony beyond, and the drop to the pavement. He examined the catch minutely, then the frame and the sill, his long fingers travelling over every inch. No scratches, no bruised putty, no grain of grit displaced upon the inside ledge, he remarked. "You observed nothing outside, Watson, when we approached?" "Nothing that suggested a ladder or rope," I answered. "Quite so. We may safely dismiss this as an entrance. An exit by this route would have left more testimony upon the paintwork, and perhaps upon the intruder himself." He turned back to the room, his gaze now on the door. He knelt again, not this time to study the footprint, but to inspect the brass of the lock and the edge of the wood. "There are no signs of violence here either," he murmured. "No bruised metal, no splintering. The man did not pick this lock in the ordinary way. Was the door locked, Sir Reginald, when you retired last night?" "It was closed, certainly," the baronet replied. "I take the key with me at night and return it in the morning. Jenkins can tell you as much." Holmes's eyes flicked to the inspector. "And you found the key where?" "On Sir Reginald's table upstairs," Lestrade answered. "He brought it down when I arrived." Holmes straightened himself. And unless we are to credit our gentleman with the power of passing through solid wood, there are two possibilities. Either the door was not in fact secured as tightly as Sir Reginald supposes, or there exists a second means of admission, another key, or a duplicate mechanism. We will speak to this Jenkins presently. Miss Avery, who had been watching Holmes with a kind of grave fascination, now said quietly, "You think someone within the household may have helped him?" "I think nothing as yet, Miss Avery," Holmes replied. "I only observe that every locked door owns two masters, the man who holds the key and the man who made it. We must interview both, so far as we are able." He passed lightly round the fallen table, pausing to examine the ink stain on the carpet and the scattered pens. "Note, Watson, the direction of the splashes," he said. "They radiate chiefly toward the fireplace. Our maid was standing between the table and the safe when she was struck. She fell sideways, upsetting the table, which describes an arc in falling. It is a small point, but it confirms her story." "It confirms that she fell," Lestrade said. "I never doubted that." "But we must never be content with generalities," Holmes returned, with a glint of amusement. "Come, I should like a word with the girl while her impressions are still fresh. After that, we will see Jenkins and his kingdom of keys." Ellen was lying in a modest upper room at the back of the house, a strip of linen bound about her head. The cook, a motherly woman with anxious eyes, rose from the chair beside the bed as we entered. "She's better, sir," she whispered. "Only a bit light-headed still." Holmes sat down where the cook had been and regarded the maid with a kindly, searching expression. "You have had a shock, my girl," he said, in a tone very different from the keen edge he used with Lestrade. "We shall not trouble you long. You saw the man in the study. Try to tell me everything, even the smallest trifle, that you noticed about him." Ellen looked nervous, but Miss Avery's reassuring presence at the foot of the bed seemed to steady her. "He was bent over the safe, sir," she began. "I thought it was Jenkins at first because of the lamp. But then he turned, and I saw the mask. It was black and covered his eyes and nose. I couldn't see his hair. He had a hat, I think, or something dark on his head." "Tall or short?" "About your height, sir. Not big like Sir Reginald. He moved very quick, very easy, like he knew just what he was doing." "His clothes?" "A dark coat, not rough like a labourer's, more like a gentleman's, only it was close about the waist. And he had gloves on, light ones." "Did he speak?" She frowned, searching her memory. "Only once, sir. When I screamed, he said, 'Quiet, girl,' like that. Not loud, but sharp." "Any accent?" She hesitated. "Not like a foreigner, sir, but there was a sort of clip to his words, as if he was used to giving orders." Holmes nodded slightly. "And the blow?" "He didn't hit me with his fist, sir. He just pushed me, hard, with his arm. I went back and struck my head on the table, I suppose." "I don't remember the floor." "One thing more. Before he turned, before he saw you, did you hear anything? A sound that was not the safe or the fire?" Her eyelids fluttered. "There was a little chink, sir, like metal on metal, not loud, like when Mr. Jenkins has the keys all hanging together." "A ring of keys," Holmes murmured. "Yes. That is very helpful, Ellen. You have done very well." As we descended once more to the lower floor, I saw that the mention of the keys had not been lost upon Lestrade. "So your man had a set of them," he said. "That narrows the field, Mr. Holmes. There aren't so many in the house who can lay hands on the study key." "Precisely why we shall now enjoy a conversation with Mr. Jenkins," Holmes replied. "It is always enlightening to hear what a man of keys has to say about doors which open themselves at midnight." We found Jenkins in his pantry, presiding over a regiment of polished silver that glittered dully in the uncertain light. He stood up at once when we entered, his back straightening with the stiff dignity of long service. "If this is about that villain, as was in the study, sir," he said, before anyone could speak, "I can only repeat what I told the inspector. No man passed through that front door after 11 o'clock, not while I was in charge of it." Holmes's glance swept once over the rows of hanging keys on the wall, the locked cupboard in the corner, the neat ledger on the side table, and lastly, the butler himself. Jenkins was spare and upright, his grey hair brushed carefully back, his black coat brushed no less. Only his hands, long and slightly gnarled, betrayed his years. "We shall not question your vigilance, Mr. Jenkins," Holmes replied courteously. "You have an excellent reputation, I am sure. It is of keys I would speak, not of doors. You are, I take it, the custodian of the household keys." "That I am, sir," Jenkins answered, with the faintest touch of pride. "Every key in this house has its appointed place." "Let us be precise," Holmes said. "The key of the study?" He nodded toward the wall. "That one, sir, on the second hook from the right. It is only there during the day, when the room is in use. At night, Sir Reginald takes it with him." "Always?" "For the last 12 years, sir," Jenkins replied. "Since the safe was put in, it was on his own instructions." Holmes stepped to the wall and examined the key in question without touching it. His gaze travelled along the row. Cellar, wine cupboard, plate safe, linen press, side door. Each hook bore a small ivory label in Jenkins's neat, slanting hand. "And when Sir Reginald takes the study key upstairs," Holmes continued, "where does he keep it?" "In the dish on his dressing table, sir. I place it there myself of an evening, when I take up the hot water. He returns it to me after breakfast." "Was that done last night?" Jenkins's lips compressed. "I took the key up at 10 o'clock, sir. Sir Reginald went to his room soon after. I saw it in the dish with my own eyes when I turned down the bed. When the inspector asked for it this morning, Sir Reginald handed it to him from the same place. So that if our nocturnal visitor used a key, it was not that one," Holmes said softly. "Tell me, has any key been mislaid of late, even for a short time?" "Never, sir," Jenkins replied firmly. "Not in my charge." Holmes's eyes strayed again to the locked cupboard. "And there?" Jenkins hesitated, then produced a small key from his waistcoat and opened it. Within, on a narrow shelf, lay a duplicate set of the principal household keys, each bound with tape and labelled in the same hand. "I keep these against loss or emergency, sir," he said, "but they are never used. The cupboard is always locked, and this key never leaves my person." Holmes picked up one bundle and held it to the light. "You have been in service with Sir Reginald a long time, Mr. Jenkins?" 27 years, sir." "And during that time have the locks been changed?" "Only once that I recall, sir. 12 years ago, when the safe was installed. A locksmith from Kensington did the work. He was here most of a day." Holmes nodded slowly, and I saw that the fact had lodged itself in his mind. "One last point," he said. "Who besides yourself has ever had occasion to handle these keys?" "No one, sir. The maids have their own keys for linen and the like. The cook has the pantry. But the principal keys—" He nodded toward the wall and the cupboard. "Are mine alone." Holmes regarded him for a moment in silence. Then quite suddenly his gaze dropped to Jenkins's feet. The butler wore square-toed shoes of polished black leather, with plain heels. "May I trouble you to lift one foot, Mr. Jenkins?" he asked. The butler, though clearly puzzled, complied. Holmes bent, inspecting the sole. "Thank you," he said, straightening again. "You will be glad to know, Lestrade, that our midnight visitor was not Mr. Jenkins. His boots would tell against him at the Old Bailey." Lestrade snorted. I never supposed they were. A man doesn't serve near 30 years in one house to come back in a mask for the family silver. Human nature is capable of strange lapses, Holmes observed. But not in this case. No, Jenkins, you are acquitted, only— Here he paused, the keen grey eyes narrowing. Only, Lestrade prompted. Only, said Holmes. If anyone had the opportunity to permit a locksmith's pattern or a second impression of that study key to exist outside this house, it would have been 12 years ago when your safe was put in. The man you describe, Watson, what was his name? You have not heard it, I returned. Lestrade did not mention it. Holmes's thin lips curved. Exactly, we must discover it. Meanwhile, I think we have squeezed this pantry as dry as it will go. I should like, if you please, a word alone with Miss Avery. Alone? Sir Reginald repeated sharply when this request was made a few minutes later in the morning room. What more can my niece tell you that she has not already said? Possibly nothing, Holmes replied amiably. Possibly a great deal. Young ladies sometimes notice things which escape our grosser masculine senses. If you object, of course. Sir Reginald's mouth worked. For an instant I thought he would refuse outright. Then he threw out his hand in a gesture of impatience. Have it your own way, then, he said. I wash my hands of the whole business. When you have finished extracting ladies' impressions, perhaps you will trouble yourself with the practical matter of catching the scoundrel. He strode from the room, the door closing rather more sharply than good breeding warranted. Miss Avery, who had risen at our entrance, looked from it to Holmes, a faint colour rising in her cheeks. You wish to speak with me, Mr. Holmes, she said. If you will be so good, he replied, his tone gentler than before. I will trespass on your patience but a few minutes. It is about last night, and about that blue envelope in your uncle's safe. Miss Avery did not answer at once. She remained standing, one hand lightly resting upon the back of the chair, her eyes lowered. I saw a slight tightening of the delicate muscles at her throat. You observed it at once when your uncle opened the safe, Holmes went on, in that even, unemphatic voice which somehow made evasion seem both useless and undignified. You remarked that you did not recall seeing it there before, yet you said nothing of that to Inspector Lestrade. Her grey eyes lifted to his. Would it have altered anything, Mr. Holmes? The police already thought the matter sufficiently strange. I did not wish to add to the confusion. It might have altered a great deal, Holmes returned gently. For instance, it might suggest that the object of the visit was not to remove something from the safe, but to place something within it. That is a very different proposition. She drew a slow breath. You think, then, that the intruder came with that envelope in his possession? I do, and that he considered it of such importance that he was willing to risk discovery, even violence, to ensure it reached that particular resting place. His gaze sharpened. Tell me, Miss Avery, do you know of any person who might wish to communicate secretly with Sir Reginald? Any who would shrink from approaching him openly? Her lips parted, then closed again. My uncle is a man of decided character, she said at last. He has quarrelled with many, but I cannot imagine any of them breaking into his house to thrust a letter into his safe. I did not use the word letter, Holmes remarked. But you do so instinctively. Why? She coloured. What else should one put into an envelope? A promissory note, a bond, a copy of a will, compromising evidence of almost any description, he replied. But I will not press you on that point, for you are not being entirely frank with me, and I prefer that our progress should be by steps, not by leaps. Let us go back a little. Has anything occurred in this house within the last few weeks or months to disturb its quiet habits? Any new visitor? Any anonymous communication? Any threat, however vague? There was a short silence. She looked toward the door through which Sir Reginald had disappeared, as if to assure herself that he was out of earshot. "My uncle," she said slowly, "has been very much preoccupied of late. There are troubles about the estate, investments, that have not prospered, I believe. I am not trusted with the details, but I know he has received letters that agitated him. I found one, by accident, a fortnight ago. It was in the drawing-room, lying half under a cushion. I picked it up, supposing it to be a note of invitation, and saw enough before he came in to know that it was anything but that." "Enough of what?" Holmes asked quietly. She hesitated, but his grave, attentive face seemed to invite confidence rather than to demand it. "It spoke of money due," she said at last, "and of a promise broken. There was a phrase, the matter of 30 years ago, and a sentence I remember perfectly, because it chilled me when I read it. 'If you will not do justice of your own free will, it shall be forced upon you by other hands.' My uncle snatched it from me and was very angry. He forbade me to mention it, but he burned it that evening. I saw the fragments in the grate." "Was it signed?" "Yes, only with initials. H.M." Holmes steepled his fingers, his eyes half closed. "And you have no idea to whom those initials might belong?" "None," she answered, and I believed her. "Yet there is some old story," he mused, "some affair which your uncle has done his best to bury, but which refuses to remain interred. Tell me, Miss Avery, did your uncle have any brothers?" She started at the question. "He had one, my father," she replied, "but he has been dead these 10 years. And did he leave his affairs in good order?" A shadow passed over her face. "No," she said quietly, "not in the least. There were debts, and other things, unpleasant things. My uncle settled what he chose to settle, and spoke very bitterly of my father afterwards. I have lived with him since." Holmes nodded once, as if some internal piece had fallen into place. "We shall not rake among family ashes more than is necessary," he said. "Only remember this, men do not write of justice in that tone unless they believe themselves deeply wronged, and men who feel themselves wronged will sometimes go very far." "You think this intruder was connected with that letter?" she whispered. "I think," Holmes answered, "that last night was not the beginning of this affair, but one of its later moves. Who directed that move, and with what precise object, we have yet to learn. One point, however, is clear. That blue envelope remains in your uncle's safe at the pleasure of the person who placed it there. He can scarcely be satisfied until it has been opened. When it is opened, something will follow. Our business is to ensure that we are prepared for that moment." He rose as he spoke, and Miss Avery, with a visible effort, mastered her agitation. "What would you have us do, Mr. Holmes?" she asked. "For the present, nothing," he replied. "You will go about your ordinary duties. You will mention to no one that we have spoken of these matters, not even to your uncle. Above all, you will watch him. If he receives another communication, if he shows any unusual agitation, you will inform me at once. I shall leave you my address." "And the envelope?" she persisted. "Should it not be destroyed if it is so dangerous?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "My dear Miss Avery," he said, "if you remove the cheese, you frighten away the mouse. The envelope is our bait. We must keep it where the right eyes can see it, and where the wrong hands cannot reach it so easily again." As we left the room, Lestrade, who had been fidgeting near the door, drew Holmes aside. "Well," he demanded, "are we any nearer our man?" "Nearer?" Holmes repeated. "We are in the same house with him, or with the consequences of his actions. That is near enough for one morning, Lestrade. Come, Watson, there is a locksmith in Kensington whom I have a particular desire to meet before the day grows older." Holmes was unusually silent as we drove westward. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets washed and grey, and the horses' hooves made a hollow music upon the paving stones. I watched my friend's long aquiline profile, the lids half lowered over the keen grey eyes, and knew better than to disturb his thoughts. It was not until we had turned into one of the smaller by-streets off Kensington High Street that he spoke. "We are dealing, Watson," he said, "not with a casual thief, but with a man who plans in decades. That is an adversary after my own heart." "You connect last night's visit directly with the letter Miss Avery described?" "Most assuredly. The envelope in the safe is not an isolated freak. It is a move in a game which began 30 years ago or earlier. Consider the elements: a baronet with a skeleton in his family cupboard, a correspondent who speaks of broken promises and justice, a safe installed 12 years back, doubtless at the baronet's own insistence, and last night a stranger who uses a key, avoids the valuables, and leaves behind not loot, but a document placed in the very heart of Sir Reginald's defences. It is a moral indictment wrapped in steel." "But why the disguise? Why the blow to the maid?" "Because the man is not yet ready to stand openly for what he claims," Holmes replied. "He dares to force his paper into Sir Reginald's notice, but not to face him with it. That timidity may be our ally. This, I think, is the establishment we require." The cab drew up before a narrow shop, squeezed between a stationer's and a tobacconist's. A modest sign above the window proclaimed, "C. Hopwood, locksmith and safe specialist." The glass displayed a miscellany of brass handles, bolts, padlocks, and a gleaming miniature safe with its door invitingly ajar. Within, the place smelt of oil and metal filings. A bell tinkled as we entered, and a short, sandy-haired man in a leather apron emerged from a back workshop, wiping his hands on a rag. His sharp blue eyes travelled from Holmes to myself, and then to Lestrade, who had joined us at the door. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. "What can I do for you? New lock? Duplicate keys?" "Perhaps a little of both," Holmes answered. "You are Mr. Hopwood?" "That's right, sir." "You have been in business here some time, I think?" 15 years in this shop and 10 before that as journeyman. Why do you ask?" "Because about 12 years ago you installed a safe in the house of Sir Reginald Avery, of Queen's Gate," said Holmes calmly. "I should be glad of a few particulars concerning that transaction." Hopwood's brows rose. "Avery? Queen's Gate? Yes, I recall the job. A good commission, but I didn't own the business then. I was working for Mr. Henry Merrow." Holmes threw me a fleeting glance which I did not at the moment understand. "Merrow," he repeated. "Initials H.M. "That's him," said Hopwood. "Henry Merrow. Best locksmith in Kensington, if you'll take it from me." "Where is he now?" Lestrade put in. "We may have questions for him as well." "You'll have to put them to the churchyard," Hopwood retorted. "He died 8 years ago, God rest him. I bought the business from his widow." Holmes nodded as if some inward speculation had been confirmed rather than thwarted. "Did Mr. Merrow keep careful records?" he asked. "Workbooks, pattern registers?" "As careful as any man in his trade," Hopwood said, a shade defensively. "I've kept them on. Job numbers, dates, names of customers, particulars of the locks, and so on. They're in the ledger there." He indicated a large, worn volume on a shelf. Holmes stepped over, ran a finger rapidly down the spine, and opened it at about the middle. "You will allow me?" he said. "Help yourself, if it'll do you any good," Hopwood answered. "Only don't spill your tobacco ash on it, that's all I ask." Holmes's eye travelled swiftly over the close lines of small writing. Presently he halted. "Here we are," he murmured. "Job 1743, Sir Reginald Avery, BT, Queen's Gate. Fit wall safe, make 3 keys, pattern retained. Date: May the 2nd, 12 years ago. You see, Watson? 3 keys made." "3?" Lestrade repeated. but Jenkins swore there were only the one in use and the one in his cupboard. Jenkins spoke of the principal keys now in his possession. Holmes returned. He knows nothing of what was ordered at the start. Tell me, Mr. Hopwood, what became of those patterns Merrow retained? Hopwood pursed his lips. Well, sir, after I took over, I went through the lot. For most jobs, the patterns were kept a year or two in case more keys were needed, then melted down or recut. A few we kept longer for regular customers, but 12 years is stretching it. Besides, Merrow had his own ways with some of the old work. There's a box of his offcuts and oddments in the back if you fancy rummaging through 12 years' scrap. Later, perhaps, Holmes said. For the moment, there is a more immediate point. In the last month, say 6 weeks, has anyone applied here for a duplicate key to Sir Reginald Avery's safe or study? To the safe? No. Hopwood shook his head with decision. I'd remember that. I never cut safe keys for strangers. To the house, well, that's another matter. Show me the ledger for the last month and I'll see. He fetched a slimmer book and turned to the most recent pages. Holmes leaned over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the entries. There you are, Hopwood said, tapping with a blunt forefinger. 10 days back. Queensgate, Avery's people. One house door key duplicated. Lestrade's head came up. Avery's people? Who brought that order? A servant I took him for, Hopwood answered. Quiet man, respectable clothes, gave the address and the name. Said the key had been mislaid, and they needed another for the side entrance, for tradesmen. Can you describe him? Holmes asked. Hopwood rubbed his chin. Middle height, not young, not old, dark moustache, I think. Spoke short and to the point, wore gloves, paid cash. Ah, said Holmes softly. Gloves again. And the key, how did he supply the pattern? He had the key with him, Hopwood said. Said it had turned up after all, but they wanted a spare in case. I cut from that and gave them both back together. Did you notice his boots? Holmes asked, so casually that one might have thought the question an afterthought. Hopwood frowned. Boots? No. Why should I? A pity, Holmes murmured. If you had, you might have admired a particularly neat arrangement of hobnails in the heel. Come, Watson, we have learned what we came for. In the street once more, Lestrade turned on him eagerly. Well, he demanded, what do you make of that? I make this, said Holmes. Within the last fortnight, a man who could pass for a respectable servant has been equipping himself with an additional means of entry to Sir Reginald Avery's house. 12 years ago, a dead locksmith retained a pattern for that gentleman's safe. A living man now possesses the power to come and go by a side door, and to leave his message in the inner stronghold without cracking a lock. Our midnight intruder, Lestrade, is not a shadow who walks through walls. He is flesh and blood, and, I suspect, nearer to the Avery household than any of them yet dream. Holmes's words lingered with me as we drove back toward Baker Street. The afternoon was already drawing in. A faint, reddish stain in the western sky showed between the chimney pots, and the air had taken on that peculiar chill which is the forerunner of a London fog. You spoke just now of a man who plans in decades, I said. You think this duplicate key is part of such a plan? Undoubtedly, Holmes replied. Observe the progression. First, a grievance of long standing. Next, a craftsman, Merrow, who is privy to the mechanism of Sir Reginald's defences. Merrow dies, but his records and patterns remain. Years pass, then suddenly, within the last fortnight, the sleeping embers are stirred, letters are written, threats implied, and at last action taken. Our adversary has been gathering tools for some time. Last night was his opening move upon the board. And what will be his next? I asked. Holmes's thin hands clasped and unclasped upon his knee. That depends upon Sir Reginald, he said, slowly.
If the baronet obeys the unspoken summons of that blue envelope and opens it, we shall have one chain of events. If he refuses, we shall have another, and a more dangerous. In either case, the next development will not long be delayed. We had scarcely reached Baker Street before he put this view into practice. He threw off his coat, rang for Mrs. Hudson, and penned, with his usual rapidity, 2 brief telegrams. "The first," he explained, "goes to Miss Avery. I remind her of our conversation and urge her to inform me instantly of any change in her uncle's demeanour or any new communication received. The second goes to Lestrade. I ask him to see that a discreet man is posted, not at the front of the house, where an intruder will expect him, but in the mews at the rear, where the side door opens." "You anticipate another visit to Queen's Gate tonight?" I asked. "I do not anticipate, I prepare," Holmes returned. "Preparation is the only weapon we possess against an enemy whose resources we do not yet know. Meanwhile, we wait. Waiting has always been, for my friend, the most trying of disciplines." He endured it that evening with an impatience which only those who know the iron self-control he habitually exerts would have recognized as unusual. He smoked, he paced, he flung himself into his chair,
only to leap from it again. Twice he took up his violin and twice laid it down after drawing from it a few abrupt, restless bars. "The pattern is incomplete," he muttered once, half to himself. "We have the outline, but not the central figure. H. M. Merrow, or some inheritor of Merrow's knowledge, or another altogether, who uses those initials to mask his own. And what, in heaven's name, is the nature of this justice he demands?" It was close upon 9 o'clock when the sharp clang of the bell downstairs brought him to the door almost before Mrs. Hudson. A red-headed telegraph boy stood in the entry, damp from a renewed drizzle. "For Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, producing a blue envelope. Holmes tore it open and glanced at the contents. I saw his eyes flash. "Watson!" he cried. "Coat and hat, instantly! Lestrade is before us. Something has happened at Queen's Gate." As we jolted once more westward in a cab, he passed me the flimsy sheet. It bore but a few hasty words in Lestrade's hand. Sir Reginald received some private paper at 8 o'clock, became violently agitated, sent for me, then shut himself into his study. At 8:40, a cry was heard. Door locked, no answer. Am about to force it. Come at once if you wish to see the room as near original state as possible. He has opened the envelope, I said. Or been made to read its contents in some other form, Holmes replied. In any case, the expected move has come. Pray heaven we are not too late to profit by it. The streets were nearly empty at that hour, save for the occasional omnibus lumbering homeward and the quick, furtive figures that haunt every great city by night. We sprang out at Queen's Gate to find the Avery house ablaze with light. A small knot of idle onlookers had already formed at a respectful distance from the steps, where a constable stood on guard. Lestrade met us in the hall. His usually impassive face was set and pale. "I was on my way to you when the message came from here," he said rapidly. Sir Reginald had passed the afternoon in his room, refusing to see anyone. At 8, a note was brought to him by the butler, delivered by hand, Jenkins says, from a man at the door who would not give his name. Sir Reginald read it, turned very strange, and ordered everyone out. Then he rang for me. I came at once, but found he had gone down to the study alone. At 20 minutes to 9, Miss Avery heard a cry from below. The study door was locked. We have not yet broken it in. I thought you'd thank me for the delay. You did perfectly, Holmes said curtly. The man posted in the mews. Has he seen anything? Nothing but a stray cat and the milkman's cart, Lestrade answered. If anyone came by the side door, he came like a ghost. "Ghosts do not leave footprints," Holmes said. "Come, let us see what our human one has done." We went along the corridor where, that morning, I had watched Holmes trace the intruder's path. Now the air seemed heavier, charged with some nameless expectancy. At the study door, a second constable stood watch, his hand upon the knob. "The key is still inside, I suppose?" Holmes inquired. "So far as we can tell, sir," Lestrade replied. "There's no sign of it on this side, and no answer when we call. Are you ready?" Holmes's face was very grave. "As ready as we shall be," he said. "Force it then, but carefully. Every splinter we disturb may be a line torn from our story." The constable set his shoulder to the wood. With a splintering crack and a final groan of protest from the old hinges, the door yielded and swung inward. What we saw beyond it I shall not soon forget. Sir Reginald Avery sat at his writing table, his head fallen forward upon his folded arms. For an instant that was all I saw, the bowed shoulders, the silver hair catching the lamplight, the scattered papers about his elbows. Then the atmosphere of the room struck me. A heavy, close taint in the air, as though something unpleasant and unfamiliar had recently been introduced into it and not yet dispersed. Holmes stepped past the threshold with panther-like quickness and flung out an arm to bar Lestrade and myself. "Stand where you are," he said sharply. "Not 1 inch further, if you please. Watson, draw back that curtain and raise the window 2 inches, gently. Do not touch the catch." The sash yielded with a faint creak. A thread of cold night air slipped in, diluting the stagnant odour. "Gas?" I whispered. "No," said Holmes. "Something more subtle. We shall come to that. Lestrade, be so good as to observe. The key is still in the lock, on the inside. You found it so?" "Exactly as you see it," the inspector replied. "We forced the door by the panels." Holmes nodded. "And you have not crossed the floor?" "Only as far as the threshold. I could see Sir Reginald was not moving, and I thought it best to wait for you." "You did admirably." Holmes produced his lens. "Now you see there, between the edge of the carpet and the skirting, the same strip of uncovered board we examined this morning. The footprint has altered, but only by drying. There is no second impression beside it, no fresh disturbance of the dust. That is important. We may advance by this line." Picking his way with extraordinary care, he stepped around the rug, keeping to a narrow channel of bare floor against the wall. We followed exactly in his tracks. Once beside the desk, he set his hand lightly on Sir Reginald's shoulder. There was no response. He raised the drooping head. The baronet's face was suffused and mottled. The lips were slightly parted, and the eyes half open with a singular glassy fixity. A thin line of froth had dried at one corner of the mouth. I bent and examined him. "He is dead," I said quietly. "But not long. Half an hour, perhaps." "You observe the pupils?" Holmes asked. "Contracted. The heart has ceased. I should say some powerful agent acting upon the nervous centres. There is no sign of external injury. His hands—" I took one of the limp hands between my fingers. The nails were faintly bluish, the skin cool, with a curious tackiness to the touch. Poison, I concluded, though of what kind I could not yet say. "A conclusion I am inclined to share," Holmes murmured. "Now see what lies beneath his hand." He lifted the dead man's arm gently. Under it, crumpled and slightly smeared as if clutched in a last convulsion, lay a half-sheet of paper. It bore but a few lines written in a bold, angular hand. "Read it, Watson," said Holmes. I smoothed it out. 30 years I have waited," I read aloud, "and you have not kept your word. The day has come when you must look upon what you did, and upon what you refused to do. You will find in your safe that which you buried, changed, yet the same. You cannot escape it now. Justice is no longer in your hands, but in mine. H.M. The same initials, Lestrade muttered. The same talk of justice. So this is another of his cursed letters. Holmes's gaze went at once to the wall above the desk. The picture still hung there, tilted as it had been that morning. He swung it aside. The safe door was closed. Sir Reginald did not die without looking into his safe, he remarked. The letter suggests as much, and the man I saw this morning would not have left his curiosity unsatisfied. Watson, your medical instincts, does his position at the table agree with sudden collapse while seated? Entirely, I replied. He is pitched forward as a man might who feels an abrupt, overwhelming weakness or a stabbing pain. He could not have moved far after the poison took effect. Then where, said Holmes softly, is the blue envelope? He opened the safe. Within, the rows of papers and little piles of coin lay in much the same order as we had left them, but there was now a gap where earlier that incongruous patch of colour had drawn the eye. The envelope was gone. Gone, Lestrade echoed. Just so. The thing is as neat as a problem in Euclid, Holmes went on. A letter arrives, summoning Sir Reginald to confront the ghost of his past. He goes to his study, locks himself in, opens his safe, takes out the envelope and reads what it contains. Shortly thereafter he dies, but the envelope itself, which would tell us what he saw, has vanished. You imply someone has been in here since? Lestrade protested. Yet you've shown there's no fresh footprint, no tampering with the window, the key's still in the lock. Precisely why I imply what I do, Holmes interrupted. The physical evidence says no one has entered since that door was secured. Yet something has been removed, therefore something is wrong with our
assumptions. He stepped back from the safe and let the picture fall. His nostrils flared slightly. Do you smell it now, Watson? He asked. I drew in the air more deliberately. Beneath the ordinary scents of lamp, leather, paper, and the faint coal smoke from the grate, there was indeed a foreign element, a bitter, almost metallic tang that caught at the back of the throat. I noticed it on first entering, I said. It is stronger near the desk. Holmes nodded, moving to the lamp. It was of the ordinary table pattern, with a green shade and a glass reservoir half filled with oil. He lifted the chimney, held his face very close, and then turned at once, his expression sharpened. Do not go too near that lamp, Watson. You have had one patient today. I prefer not to add another. There is more than oil in that reservoir. You think the poison was administered through the air? I exclaimed. I think, he replied, that Sir Reginald Avery's last act was to bring flame to that wick. Look at the matches scattered here, 3, 4 of them, as if in some agitation he struck more than one to make it catch quickly. He sat down, perhaps with the envelope in his hand, perhaps having already read it, and drew the lamp nearer. The vapour would be swift, subtle, irresistible. A convenient method, Watson, when one desires a locked room without staying to lock it. But then, Lestrade began, then broke off, his brow furrowing. If the poison was in the lamp, who put it there? Holmes's eyes went once more to the dead man's face, then to the crumpled letter on the blotting pad, and finally to the unbroken line of dust along the skirting board. That, my dear Lestrade, he said, is the question upon which this entire case turns. Sir Reginald might himself have poured his death into that reservoir, but I do not think it. There is a more ingenious hand at work. Before we sleep tonight, we must see Miss Avery. Her grief will be great, but there are things she must tell us now, or she will never tell them at all. Miss Avery was waiting in the morning room, though how long she had been there, I could not say. The moment Holmes entered, her eyes flew to his face, and whatever she read there was enough. She swayed slightly and caught at the back of a chair. My uncle, she began. Holmes inclined his head. I am afraid, Miss Avery, that Sir Reginald has suffered what no physician can mend. It was very sudden. He would have felt little. She sank into the nearest seat and covered her face with her hands. For some minutes, no one spoke. Lestrade, embarrassed by such grief, shifted his weight from foot to foot. Holmes stood quite still, his gaze resting not on the girl but on the fire smouldering low in the grate. When at last she mastered herself, she raised her head. "Was it natural?" she asked, in a strained voice. "He has been very much agitated of late. The doctor said his heart." The immediate cause was not natural, Holmes said gently. Your uncle has been poisoned. She stared at him, horror slowly dawning in her eyes. Poisoned? But who would do such a thing? We are a quiet household. There is no one. There is at least one, Holmes interrupted, though not unkindly. The man who wrote to him tonight under the initials H.M. Tell me, Miss Avery, did you see that note? She pressed her fingers to her temples, forcing herself to think. Jenkins brought it up at 8 o'clock, she said. It was in a plain envelope. I was in the drawing room as my uncle passed through with it in his hand. He had just broken the seal. He glanced at it, and I saw all the colour go out of his face. He said, "Yes?" Holmes prompted. He said, "So Merrow is not finished with me yet," she whispered. Then he crumpled the paper and went back to his room. A few minutes later, he rang and ordered the study to be left ready for him. He would see no one. I did not know. Her voice failed. Holmes nodded slowly. You have helped us more than you realize, he said. You had not mentioned that name before. It confirms what I suspected. There is one thing more I must know, painful as it may be. In your grief, did you observe whether anything had been burned in the study grate? In the study? She shook her head. No, I only saw him. I could look at nothing else. Quite so, forgive me. He turned at once and led the way back along the corridor. Lestrade and I followed him again into that fatal room, where the constable still stood guard at the ruined door. Holmes went straight to the fireplace. The fire had burned low to a bed of red ash, with here and there a blackened clinker. Taking the poker, he stirred it with the nicest care, teasing apart the crust of cinders until a faint patch of colour showed amongst the grey. "Ha!" he exclaimed softly. With the tongs he withdrew several fragments of charred paper and laid them upon the cold hearthstone. They were brittle and blackened at the edges, but in the centre of one larger piece a smear of blue still lingered. On another, where the fire had bitten less deeply, a ghost of ink traced itself against the scorched fibre. The lower curl of a capital J, the tail of an S, and the letters ICE dimly visible. "Justice?" said Holmes. Our friend H.M. was not so careful of his prose as to vary his vocabulary. You will remember, Watson, the phrase from the earlier letter Miss Avery described. A note, if you please, the paper itself. He held one scrap up to the light of the lamp, keeping his face averted from its vapours. Good quality, faintly glazed, he murmured. And here, in the corner, the remains of a watermark, the same as that upon the blue envelope we saw this morning. Sir Reginald obeyed his summons, opened the safe, read what had been
placed there for him, and in a fit of fear or fury thrust envelope and contents alike into the fire. That is why we found the one missing and the other charred. The act itself tells us almost as much as the writing would have done. Lestrade scratched his chin. It tells us he was badly frightened at any rate, he said. A guilty conscience, if you like. But it doesn't name his murderer. On the contrary, Holmes replied, between this grate That lamp and our visit to Kensington, the murderer stands almost indecently revealed. Come, Lestrade, we must not keep Mr. Hopwood of High Street waiting too long for his arrest." Lestrade stared. "Hopwood, the locksmith? Who else?" Holmes returned, with a flash of impatience. "You have his description in your own notebook. A short, sandy man, smelling of oil and metal filings, in intimate possession of Merrow's patterns and records." He recognized the name Avery without effort. He knew that 3 keys had been made 12 years ago and that one pattern at least was retained. He had full opportunity to fashion for himself a means of entry where none had existed before. Add to that the faint odour of machine oil upon the blue teddy envelope in Sir Reginald's safe, the curious care with which he recorded the order, Avery's people, his own visit in disguise, to duplicate a house key, the description given by Ellen of a quiet, gloved man of middle height, and the fact that Merrow himself, whose initials headed the letters, is 8 years in his grave. Who then speaks for Merrow now, if not the man who bought his business, inherited his papers, and has steeped himself for 15 years in the dead locksmith's grievances? "But his initials," I began. "His heart, not his name, supplied them," Holmes snapped. "He wrote as the mouthpiece of Henry Merrow. We may discover that he is a nephew, a protégé, or merely an avenger who has taken his master's wrongs as his own. It is immaterial. The pattern of the crime remains. He had the knowledge to enter the house, the skill to tamper with the lamp so that it should become an invisible assassin, and the audacity to walk through Sir Reginald's defences as through so much paper. Our masked intruder of last night and the letter-writer of tonight are one and the same. Charles Hopwood, lately of Merrow and Hopwood, locksmiths." "You speak very confidently," Lestrade said, though there was more respect than doubt in his tone. "But a judge will want more than theories." "He shall have them," Holmes answered. "You will oblige me by securing Hopwood at once. Examine his boots. You will find upon one heel the exact pattern of hobnails we saw in that solitary footprint. Search his premises. You will discover a mask, a pair of light gloves with ink on the tips, the duplicate key of Sir Reginald's side door, and, if I know my man, a little phial or residue of the same compound that lay in that lamp. I recommend you act before he has time to read the evening papers." Lestrade wasted no further words. Within the hour he was on his way, accompanied by 2 constables. Holmes and I returned to Baker Street to await the outcome, which was not long delayed. Shortly after midnight the familiar tread sounded upon our stairs, and Lestrade entered, his thin face alight with a grim satisfaction. "You were right, Mr. Holmes," he said, dropping into a chair. "We found him in the act of packing a bag, boots as you described, with the same queer hobnailing, a mask and gloves in a drawer, a ring of keys with one that fits Avery's side door, and a bottle of oily stuff that our analyst says is no innocent mixture. When I put it to him plainly, he tried to brazen it out, but when I mentioned Merrow's name, he went as white as a sheet. Before we left, he had made a full statement. It's as black a tale of old debt and brooding revenge as ever I heard." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Ah, then I was not unjust to him." "Not by half," Lestrade returned. "Seems Merrow did a piece of shady work for Sir Reginald 30 years back, fixed a lock in a way that helped the baronet to cheat a partner, from what I can gather. Merrow expected to be set up for life. Instead, he was thrown a few guineas and a curse for his pains. He never forgave it. He kept copies of the papers, and when he was dying he poured the whole story into Hopwood's ears. The younger man took it to heart. He's been nursing it all these years, waiting his chance. When he heard the Avery estate was shaky, and the safe still the same, he started his game, letters first, then the midnight visit to plant his precious justice in the strong box, and finally this poisonous lamp trick to make sure Sir Reginald paid with his life as well as his peace of mind. A morbid and narrow nature, Holmes said quietly, capable of great patience and small pity. You may safely leave him to the law, Lestrade. The rope will complete what Sir Reginald began when he chose dishonour over upright dealing. After the inspector had gone, there was a long silence in our rooms. The fire burned low. The street outside had quieted to a distant murmur. At last I spoke. You are thinking of Miss Avery, I said. Holmes nodded. She inherits a tarnished name and an estate half ruined by its owner's follies. Yet she is free of his guilt and of Merrow's madness alike. It is something. Do you believe Sir Reginald deserved his fate? I asked. My dear Watson, said Holmes, reaching for his pipe, it is a capital mistake to theorize about what men deserve. I content myself with what they do. Sir Reginald did a wrong and strove to hide it behind locks and legal forms. Merrow did a wrong and strove to redress it with murder. Between the two, I find my sympathies rest with a pale young woman who did neither and must now live with both. If there is any justice in the affair, it will be found not in Hopwood's revenge nor in the court's sentence, but in the way Miss Avery shapes her life from this point forward. He settled back in his chair, the smoke rising in thin blue spirals about his hawk-like face. As for the case itself, he added with a faint smile, it had, you must admit, one or two points of interest. A footprint, a poisoned lamp, and a message smuggled into a locked safe. Hardly a dull day's work, even in Baker Street. Pray do not omit the more instructive details when you come to chronicle the case of the Midnight Intruder, Watson. Our friend Lestrade will never forgive you if the Yard's share in it is not handsomely acknowledged. You may rely upon me, I said. And so it was that the strange vengeance of Henry Merrow, deferred for 30 years and carried out by another hand, came at last to its grim conclusion, leaving behind it a dead man, a broken plot for justice, and in the quiet house at Queen's Gate, one solitary figure looking out into the London fog with her future, like the street below, veiled yet faintly glimmering with possible light.